In this step, let's get started with what is cloud, why do we need cloud, and what is AWS. Let's go a few years back and see the world before the cloud. Applications have varying load throughout the year. Let's take a couple of examples. Let's start with an online shopping application. Online shopping applications have peak load during holidays and weekends, and they have less load during rest of the time. Let's consider another example. A startup suddenly becomes popular. So how to handle this sudden increase in load? A very important thing to remember is that as load varies, the infrastructure that is needed to support your application also varies. If you have more load, you need more infrastructure. And the approach that was taken by enterprises before the cloud was to procure the infrastructure, was to buy infrastructure for peak load. If the expected peak load is 1 million users, I would buy infrastructure to support 1 million users. Now think about this. What would that infrastructure be doing during periods of low load? Let's talk about the startup. What did the startup do before the emergence of cloud? They used to buy infrastructure assuming they were successful. What if they are not successful? So before the cloud, there were several challenges. Challenge number 1, low infrastructure utilization. I'm procuring infrastructure for peak load. What would the infrastructure be doing when there is less load, lesser number of users? It would be sitting idle, not used at all. Challenge number 2 is that it needs ahead of time planning. How do I know what is the peak load? Can we really guess the future? Challenge number 3 is the high cost of procuring infrastructure. Buying infrastructure is not cheap. And in addition to this, you need a dedicated infrastructure maintenance team. Think about a startup. Can it really afford an infrastructure maintenance team? This is the scenario when cloud started getting really popular. With the cloud, we don't buy resources. We actually rent resources. This is called provisioning. We provision resources whenever we want them and release them back to the cloud when we don't need them. This is called on-demand resource provisioning. You rent resources based on the demand on your applications. And the advantages of going for cloud are really clear. Number 1, you're trading capital expense for variable expense. Capital expense is the money you spend ahead of time to buy your infrastructure. Instead of that, we are going for variable expense, or we are paying rent. Advantage number 2 is that you can benefit from massive economies of scale. Each of the popular cloud providers handle millions of servers, and therefore they are able to get the best deals from the infrastructure providers. And because the cloud landscape is very competitive, typically the cloud providers pass on that advantage or the benefit to us. Another advantage is that you don't need to guess capacity anymore. Whenever the load on your application increases, you can provision more resources. You can request for more resources. Whenever the load on your application goes down, you can release resources back to the cloud. Another advantage is going global in minutes. Imagine a startup in India. With a click of a button, they can deploy their applications to multiple parts of the world, to different continents around the world. Cloud allows businesses and startups to avoid undifferentiated heavy lifting. If you'd want a highly available and highly durable database, setting it up takes a long time. You need to worry about setting up standbys. You need to worry about setting up backups for your database. And if you are making use of the cloud, setting up a database becomes really, really easy. So cloud helps you to avoid undifferentiated heavy lifting and helps you to focus on the solutions you are providing for your customers. Another advantage is that you don't need the data centers anymore. So you can stop spending money running and maintaining your data centers. Until now, we looked at why we need the cloud and what are the advantages it offers. Now, let's look at AWS. Why AWS? AWS is the leading cloud service provider. The main competitors for AWS are Azure and Google Cloud. Among these, AWS provides the most number of services. There are 200 plus services that AWS offers. And I'm sure by the time you watch this course, there will be a lot more services. In the last decade, AWS also proved itself to be very reliable, very secure, and cost effective. There are a number of large enterprises which run their applications on AWS, for example, Netflix. You'll learn a lot more about AWS as we go further in the course. We go to the cloud because it's cost effective. You can avoid planning upfront and you can avoid undifferentiated heavy lifting. We go to AWS because it's the leading cloud service provider. Now, if your objective is to learn these services, is there a best path to learn AWS? Whenever we talk about cloud applications, they make use of multiple AWS services. Important thing for you to understand is that there is no single path to learn these services independently. There is no path which says, okay, learn this first, learn this next, and this is after that. All these services are really interconnected, making it difficult to create a path to learn these services independently. However, we have worked out a very simple path where we introduce the important services first and make it really easy for you to learn these services one by one. Are you excited to learn all these services and get started with AWS? Let's get started right away. In the next step, let's get started with setting up our AWS account. We'll create an AWS account and we'll also create a secure user to help you make use of the AWS account. I'll see you in the next step.